Okay, well, it's 6 p.m., so we can go ahead and jump into it. Thank you all for being here for the City of Irvine's districting workshop. Before we get into the meat of the content for today, I'm just going to cover a few Zoom logistics. So just so you know, I'm sure you all got a notification as you hopped into the room today that this meeting is being recorded. The meeting recording will be posted to the drawirvine.org website after the fact. So that way, if you know anyone that wanted to join this meeting and were not able to, or if you yourself want to go back after this meeting and be able to rewatch the recording and to hear Dr. Justin Lovett's insights into things, that meeting will be there. And then we also have several language rooms and interpretation rooms down at the bottom. Down at the bottom of your screen here, you will see interpretation. And then if you click on that button, you can go into a different room. We are asking all participants to go into a language room. So at this point, I'm going to give us all a second so that way we can all jump into a language room. English speakers, we do ask that you jump into English. So with that, and then the other rooms that we have available are Spanish, Japanese, Mandarin, Arabic, Farsi, Vietnamese, and Korean. And we have those languages available. So at any point, if you do need language interpretation, please feel free to hop into those language rooms. Those rooms will also all be recorded, and those will be posted to the drawirvine.org website as well. And then the last tidbit of logistics for today, I'm sure you all know, but we're on Zoom, and that means some of our features are limited. And if you do want to speak today, you do have to use the raise your hand feature, and one of our support technicians will ask you to unmute yourself, and then you can provide your question verbally. If you would like to provide your question or comment at any point throughout the webinar via chat, we do have the Q&A feature available for you. So feel free to utilize that at any point throughout the webinar. And then with that, we'll jump into the meat of the presentation for today, covering some introductions. First and foremost, my name is Allie Torres. I am with Trippepi Smith, the outreach and consulting firm that's working with the city alongside this project. You also have Dr. Justin Lovett, who you will hear from in a minute. He is with National Demographics Corporation, one of the premier demographics corporations in the state. And then with that, you also have Hillary Aluwala. And Hillary, I'll pass it to you to say a few words from the city.
Thanks so much. I am so excited to see so many people here to participate in this process today. I just want to say thank you for that. We're entering a new exciting phase of this effort with the City Council having selected focus maps. And as a representative for the City of Irvine, I just want to thank everyone for attending the forum and being engaged. I'm excited for the discussion that will follow the presentation and excited to hear any feedback from you all at the conclusion of this forum. So thank you.
And then with that, we'll cover some of today's goals. So the goals remain the same for every webinar throughout the entire process. You do have some of, like I said, the Premier Demographics Corporation on this call. And so you will be able to learn from the experts, gain insights from them, and be able to take notes away that you may not be able to get on a day-to-day just by accessing some of the resources that are available to you. But then you also have the opportunity to provide your feedback, and the experts on this call, Justin, myself, Hillary, we all are able to listen to the feedback that you have, whether that be on the focus maps, whether that be on the process itself, on any of the mapping tools. We do want to hear from you, as you're the experts in your own community. So you're able to provide your expertise on knowing there's this portion of my community that I want to see represented here, X, Y, and Z. And then with that, we hope at the end of this community forum, you're able to leave empowered to provide the effective feedback in order to keep providing and being an active participant in this very important process. And I'm sure if you're on this webinar, you do care already about districting, but we do want to just remind you as we go through the rest of the presentation, some points to keep in mind. So democracy does work better when more people are involved in a process. And with you being on this webinar, with you providing any feedback or commentary throughout the entire process, we're able to ensure that this democratic process is working at its best possible rate. And then, as mentioned, you are the experts of your neighborhoods and your communities. You know your villages the best, you know your exact block the best. You know the like pockets of people that are within your specific neighborhood. And so we do want you to be an active participant in this process and feel as if you were vocal and had a voice throughout this process. So we do want you to be able to use that voice as much as possible. And then these districts, if the voters do adopt them, they will be around until 2031. So we do want to be sure that these are districts that best represent the community that you live in. And then some last logistics here. We will be going until about 7:30 for today, and we'll be covering the rules, processes, and goals of the whole districting process. Justin will provide an overview of the focus maps, and then we'll have a section for Q&A. And then actually you'll be able to provide your own feedback on the focus maps that Justin will be presenting. And then we'll go over some next steps. So at the Q&A and feedback is the time that we will ask you all to either type something into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll unmute you in order for you to provide your questions or feedback. And then with that, Justin, I'll pass this over to you so that way you can just get into the meat of it.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Allison, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone who is watching this, whether on Zoom or by recording. Today's presentation is a little bit shorter and more focused than our first round presentation, now that we're looking at some actual draft maps. But I want to start by taking a step back from that and looking at what we're doing here. Essentially, what the council is proposing is to put a charter amendment on the March 2024 ballot that would increase the size of the city council from 5 members to 7. In this process, 6 of the 7 council seats would become elected by district. By district means that the city would be divided into 6 more or less equally populated areas, and 1 representative would live within each of the 6 districts, and the voters who live within that area would be able to elect that particular council member. This would not affect the mayor, who would continue to be elected at large. Now, what I really want to emphasize here is that although the council will select which map goes on the ballot, the choice of the map and the choice to go to district elections isn't actually up to the council. It's going to be up to the voters to decide whether or not this is a proposal that makes sense for the city of Irvine. And so as we move through this process and as we go into the next stage of this process, which will be to have this vote in March of 2024, really it'll come down to your decision as a voter of the city of Irvine. Is this a course that makes sense for the city? If adopted, these districts would first be used in November of 2024, and as Allison mentioned, would last until the 2030 election. Following that 2030 election, there would be a redistricting, and every 10 years thereafter following the census. So lines are not permanent. They do change, especially as our city changes. The lines will reflect that every 10 years. We go on to the next slide. Our focus tonight is really on the districting process, or on selecting that map that will be placed on the ballot. So here we have kind of an overview of our timeline. We had our first initial round of hearings started back in April and continued through May. In June, we had our first deadline for submission of draft maps, which led to our first round of draft maps being published on, prior to July 4th, July 3rd. And last week on July 11th, we had our first public hearing specifically on the draft maps. Now, we're still early in the second stage of the process. Throughout the summer, we'll continue to have workshops on the district maps and on which of these maps might make sense for the city of Irvine. There'll be another round of public submissions of draft maps, leading to our September 12th hearing, where we'll go back in front of the council and talk about draft maps again. This will last another, after that next hearing, we'll have our map selection hearing on October 10th, followed by the charter vote, as I mentioned before, on the primary election, on the March 2024 election, leading to our first elections in November of 2024, if approved by the voters. Now, that round of workshops, if we go to the next slide, is both before and after that September 12th hearing. So we do have our next set of workshops. We have 4 workshops in August that'll be before that September 12th hearing. And then we have another 2 workshops in late September on the 23rd, following the September 12th hearing. So please come to our hearings. We will have big poster boards with all of the maps on them. And I'll say all the focus maps on them. And as the council chooses new focus maps or revised maps in September, we'll have those new maps for the hearing on the 23rd as well. We tried to space these out across the city, mixing up the order, so we don't just go to the same places at the same time of the process. So this time we're going to kick it off here. And then in August, we have Quail Hill and South Coast Chinese Cultural Center forums. And then on the 26th, we have Lakeview Senior Center and Heritage Park Library. And then followed that on the 23rd, we'll be going to the Great Park and to City Council chambers. Please make sure, if you're interested in this, to sign up for our mailing list. We will send reminders out before each of these weekends to notify you of these hearings. If we go to the next slide, we do want to review the districting rules and goals. And I know I spent a lot of time talking about this in our first round of presentations. I'm not going to spend quite as long tonight, but I do want to emphasize that now our rules and goals become our criteria we can use to evaluate the maps. So, for example, federal laws, we said our first one was equal population, which meant that each of the 6 districts has to be the same number of residents, more or less. Well, the council has removed from consideration 5 maps that did not meet this basic requirement. And all 6 of our focus maps do. Now, what that requirement is that each of the districts must be more or less equal in terms of their total residents. We are allowed a maximum difference or deviation between the largest and the smallest of 10%. And essentially, it includes everybody. It's a total population metric. So it's not based on the number of voters. It's not based on the number of adults. It's based on everyone counted as part of that census count. We also have to consider the Federal Voting Rights Act. While race or ethnicity cannot be the only criteria in the consideration of a map, we have to consider protected class communities and whether or not a map drawn in a particular way does the best job of making sure that those protected class communities have the equal access to the vote. This does not mean simply picking the map with the highest, for example, Latino population or Asian population, but it does mean we have to consider those protected class communities as we look at the middle column. The middle column here, we call it California Criteria for Cities. This is the 2019 law called the Fair Maps Act, which laid out a rank-ordered series of criteria for the council to consider. The first is that districts must be contiguous. That is, they must have one outside boundary. I'm pleased to say that all of our focus maps do have contiguity. Our second one, undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest, is really the heart of this public process. Which map or maps do the best job of keeping neighborhoods together, if at all possible? And as we talked about previously at our first round of hearings, we might have different ideas about where neighborhoods are or where communities of interest are. Which is basically how neighborhoods fit together or come together to form communities. And that's where the heart of this discussion is. Which alignment, which version of the map does the best job of keeping those communities of interest that should stay together for the purpose of their fair and effective representation together? Following that, we want to make sure that we can do easily identifiable boundaries to the extent possible. This means following major roads or other natural or man-made features rather than simply jogging through a neighborhood, jogging through the back streets of the business district. Let's see if we can try to make sure we can identify districts to voters, to residents, by easily identifiable boundaries. And compactness is our fourth consideration. The law defines compactness as not bypassing one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. This is aimed at hooks and fingers. We did have a map that we felt did not meet the bounds of compactness. I believe it's map 129. And that, you take a look at the map. I invite you all to our website. We'll go over there later, because you can see what a less than perfectly compact map looks like. In addition, the California criteria for cities prohibits a consideration of partisanship. As the law says, districts shall not be drawn to favor or discriminate against a political party. To this extent, that's been interpreted by many of jurisdictions, including Irvine, as our city council races are nonpartisan, and in fact, they cut across a lot of partisan issues at the federal and state level. And let's keep it that way by not thinking about simply what are the political numbers in each district, what are the party registration or turnout in each district. You'll notice that our data set does not include that information. And it's not a consideration in how we've been talking or drawing the lines. And finally, our third column, other traditional districting principles, are points that the courts have recognized as being valid to consider. And we can consider them after and only after we consider everything in the first two columns. What that means is that we should think of them as sort of a final test. If we're looking at two equally good maps according to the Fair Maps Act, the middle column, two maps that meet all the federal requirements, then we can look at a factor like underpopulating areas that are likely to have more population growth over the next decade. Maps that don't pair two incumbents in the same district. But that's not a requirement. It's only something we can look at if we have two maps that we think do an equally good job meeting the Fair Maps Act and federal criteria. And so let's go to the next slide and return to the maps themselves. If we go to the next slide, please. As we turn to the maps themselves, we're going to go later onto the website. But I do want to stress that in addition to the maps we have in the presentation, all the maps we've received as part of this process are part of the are shown on the interactive web viewer. Now let's go to the next slide. We received a total of 43 maps from residents of the community. That's a really big number. In fact, I think for round one or the first round of the process, I don't think I've seen a higher number of initial submissions, including a lot of submissions at our community events and pop-up events. In fact, I think we've got a total of 4 of these maps, single district maps, that came out of people just coloring in our maps at the pop-up events led by Trepepi Smith and the City of Irvine's outreach team. Now, of these 43 maps, 5 maps were single districts. These single district maps, although obviously can't be adopted as a full map, are nonetheless really important to understanding communities. Take a look at these maps and you'll see that there are some overlaps. For example, I believe the West Park neighborhood is in at least 3 different communities of interest between these 5 maps, which just goes to show that people may disagree on where communities of interest lie. We also received 5 maps that were not population balanced. And again, although these maps cannot be adopted as they stand, they do serve an important purpose at illustrating, for example, map 103. If we didn't have to deal with population balancing, how would we divide the communities and neighborhoods in such a way that was reflective of 6 different divisions of the city of Irvine? We also received a map that had 3 2-member districts. And as I mentioned earlier, a map that was not particularly compact. 129. As we often see, did see a member of the community submit 8 maps by himself. And we welcome that as well. If you have a lot of different maps, we welcome you to submit what you want. Although if you do submit a lot of maps, we will ask you to identify your preferred map. Some of those maps were even submitted with the statement, I don't expect that anybody would like this map. In fact, I don't like it, but I thought it was important to show. But we draw in everything we receive as required. And we really hope that, if you do draw a lot of maps, you'll think about how they'll add to the conversation. Finally, NDC also drew 2 maps, 144 and 145, based on testimony and feedback that we received from people who didn't submit or possibly didn't submit maps. And we'll talk about that as we go look at 144 later in this presentation. During our July 11th hearing, the council selected 6 focus maps. We have those numbers here, 126, 133, 135, 136, 138, and 144. We had asked the council to select focus maps to help us focus in our conversation, because really going through 43 or 45 maps, including the 2 NDC maps, that's a staggering task. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And so in our presentation, as you can see, and we'll show you where to look at that, we grouped the maps together by similar features, allowing for us to look at those similarities and distinct differences between the maps. Now, the council also made a request for a new map at that meeting. It will be published as map 146, hopefully by the end of this week. We're working on the final details of that to make sure it's a population balanced, legally compliant. That map includes the northern 2 districts, 1 and 2, from map 109. And the bottom districts, the southern 4 districts, essentially identical to 144. And it turns out that produces a map that is slightly over 10% deviation. It's about 11.5% deviation. So we're working with that to get that number down to below 10% in a way consistent with what the council's goals are with that map. I like to say that at this point, none of these maps, we haven't eliminated any maps. I mean, perhaps we can think of the 12 maps that don't meet the requirements as eliminated. But at this point, I really want us to think about all the maps that we have received so far that are legal as potential options. So even if it's not a focus map, it doesn't mean it doesn't provide any value. It doesn't mean it's going to disappear from the website. It doesn't mean that you can't bring it up or talk about it if you want to relay comments relating to to a specific map. Similarly, I don't anticipate that any of these 6 focus maps are going to be the final map adopted. Undoubtedly, as we move through the process, we're going to try to work on changes. We're going to work on revisions. I already know of community members who are talking about how they would like to see one of these maps as a starting point, but not necessarily the final adoption. And so final map adopted. And so there'll be an opportunity at our next 2 hearings in September and October to look at revised versions and changes to the maps. But what do the maps look like? Let's go to the next slide and begin to talk about each of the maps in detail or individually. And I say we've left off a lot of detail on these maps for the purposes of the PowerPoint presentation. We do offer on the website a much more detailed version of this map, particularly one that allows you to zoom in and out and search for locations. And we'll go to that after we look at the maps, do a first pass through the maps. Map 126 was one of our maps that we grouped together that illustrates trying to create this kind of district in particular, these districts in the west and south that follow the major roads to the extent possible and avoid dividing communities. So for example, on map 126, what we're looking at is a map that uses Culver Boulevard in the very south end of the district, and tries to keep communities together by putting the business center, IBC, entirely in one district, which requires moving Rancho San Joaquin into a different district. And you'll notice District 6 simply includes 4 communities without dividing any of them, 3 villages, 4 planning areas, but undivided areas. Where communities are divided, they're divided along the railroad tracks by and large, or freeways. So that would be an example of following major roads and following community of interest boundaries. On each of these maps, we've put the suggested sequence of elections as required. And it's really to start us thinking about how we might decide which districts are up in which years. And we'll talk more about the sequence after we go through the maps. Let's move to map 133. Map 133, you can see, we've used the original numbering. So all of these public submissions, people had their numbering for the maps. And so we just import what you submit to us, especially if you're using our internet tool, Dave's Redistricting. So you can see that whereas districts 1 and 2 were in the north, now districts 1 and 2 are in the west on this map. District numbering is completely arbitrary and has no relevance but to the map adopted. But just to call that out is kind of, I know some people have been confused about where some of the numbers are and why. They reflect the people's original submissions. Again, this, unlike the last map, where it moved Rancho San Joaquin into a separate district from the rest of the college community, this one uses UCI boundary, Culver Boulevard, or Culver Drive, sorry, all the way up to the 405 freeway. And this requires splitting the IBC community in order to compensate for that. But this does provide a fairly compact districts 1 and 4. Although we do have a slightly jagged edge through the Stonegate community between areas 5 and 6. That continues into some of the neighboring communities. So perhaps we could say this has very clean lines and avoids dividing communities by and large in the south end of the map. But that boundary between 5 and 6 is a little bit more jagged or irregular. If you go to the next slide, 135 is a similar proposal to kind of the last couple that we've seen. This one also does population balancing by putting Rancho San Joaquin in with Area 2. They also include University Park in that district as well. In order to balance the population, it divides the Woodbridge community. So this is probably a less compact map than what we've seen, but it does have a northern district that includes a lot of the currently growing or new growth areas in the northern end of the city, in District 6. And it was one of the selections chosen by the council to move on. And so one of our questions, particularly that 3, 4, 5, 6 boundary, kind of where they all meet up in the northern end of the Great Park, that would be one of our questions. Is that compact enough? Does that boundary make sense to residents in that area? Let's go to the next slide. 136 is a very compact map. We actually had the creator of this map come to the hearing on July 11th and discuss what he was trying to do with the map, which is a great point that if you do submit a map and you want to speak to specific aspects of it, please, you feel free to come to our hearings. We can pull the map up for you so we can talk to specific details of it. One of the things this map does is it creates 3 very solidly majority Asian districts by total population. And I say by total population because, we look at this difference between total population and citizen voting age or eligible voter population. In this map, districts 1, 2, and 3 are each 57% Asian American by total population, but districts 1 and 2 are only about 45 maybe actually like 42% Asian American by voting population. Whereas some of the other maps have 1 or 2 majority Asian districts by voting population as well. What this map illustrates is a central district in District 4, the El Camino, Woodbridge, Oak Park neighborhoods, kind of the historic city center of the city of Irvine, is kept together. And to do that, we have District 5, which kind of connects neighborhoods around the university, both more the single family homes in both the West Park and Turtle Rock area, Quail Hill, and all of that area in District 5. We go to the next slide. 138 is another map that's similar to one of the ones we've already seen, 135, in that it kind of has that central District 4 kind of along the 5 freeway. Like that other map, it does divide Woodbridge, and it uses the Rancho San Joaquin split there to balance the populations without dividing communities in Districts 1 and 2. It also creates that northern district that we saw in other maps in Area 6 that kind of cuts across a lot of the new growth in the northern areas of the city. And lastly, if we go to the last map, 144 was an NDC map that was looking at a way of drawing 2 majority Asian American districts by eligible voter or citizen voting age population. In this map, that's Districts 1 and 2, both of which are about 51, 52% Asian American by eligible voting population. In this map, we were trying to use Culver Boulevard in the south, and we simply try to follow the straightest lines possible when we needed to divide communities in order to create the population balance or fulfill the population balance requirement. Now, like I said, these are only starting points. We don't believe any of these maps will be adopted in their current form. And the council has already requested a map that combines aspects of some of the maps we've seen today, including a map that they did not move along as a focus map, map 109. We would love to have that for you today, but we're still working out the details of that. Now, if we go to the next slide, I do need to say a few words about sequence of election. We've been getting some questions about this, and particularly the council is asking a lot of questions that are very important to residents of the city who will be voting in district elections if adopted next November. And the answer is that basically we have a state process that governs expansions of the council like this. The final map does need to indicate which districts will hold which elections when, and that process is up to the council to make that determination. So the council decides which districts are up in which election. It also doesn't affect the current terms. If a council member was elected to an at-large seat, they continue to serve at large regardless of which district they're drawn into until they run for re-election in a district-based seat. In a practical sense, of the new 6 districts, 4 will have to hold an election in 2024. 3 of those 4 seats will be up for a full 4-year term, and 1 will be up for a 2-year short term. The remaining 2 districts will be put up for a full term, 4-year term, in 2026. Also, that short-term district will have its full-term election, first full-term or 4-year election in 2026. This is to ensure that we always have 7 members on the council. We don't want to be in a situation where we have 6 members for any period. So that's why we need to have that 1 district that's put up for a short term. In fact, what I would say is that historically, when cities have switched to district elections, having a short term is not actually a bad thing. It's often really important because oftentimes the area with a short term is an area that doesn't have a member currently living in that area. and it allows for voters in that area to choose their representative immediately, have somebody on the council for those 2 years, and then be able to revisit that decision in 2 years rather than having to wait 4, if, regardless of who gets elected. In terms of which seats are up in which election, other than trying to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where it's the same 2 seats, in one part of the city that have the same, like the 2026 election, there's really no rhyme or reason to it. We can, and we invite comments if you would like to provide them on which districts should be up for the long term and which or earlier and which should be up later. But it really doesn't matter in the long run, particularly since Irvine is high turnout, regardless of we're talking about midterm or presidential election years. So I'm happy to talk about that further if there are any questions. And I know the council had a lot of questions about this that we answered in our July 11th hearing. Now let's talk a little bit, let's go to the next slide. I know I've talked a lot about this, and I'd like to turn over to the website briefly, because we've shown you a lot here today. But no matter how much I talk about, it's nothing compared to the resources available on our website. And I would also encourage all of you to sign up for our mailing lists, sign up to, find out more information about the process, watch our video that we've made, and get involved by looking at the maps in detail and perhaps even drawing your own map. The website does have all of these presentations posted. If we jump to the schedule tab for quickly, you can see that every single meeting we have video for, from our last virtual presentation, we have our recordings in all of our different languages like we're going to have tonight. You can also see the events that we're going to be at, including our pop-up events. And as we have more information, staff reports, agenda notices, it all gets posted on our schedule website. Now, one thing that's going to look a little different, if we go to our draft maps tab, our draft maps tab now has all of our maps on it. And this is a great place to go when we're looking at those those maps themselves. We do have, and let's open just map 126. Each map does have both a map itself and on the second page, a full page of demographics about the map. That includes the population, the voting eligible voter population, the registration, and all of those demographics that we talked about at the beginning of the process, like income and housing and education. It's all right here on this spreadsheet. So you can compare maps by putting them side by side and their demographics side by side and looking at that. We also have all of our submissions here this way, as we can see on the website, even our single district or otherwise non-compliant maps. And again, as I said, just because something was not chosen as a focus map doesn't mean it doesn't offer something else for us. Let's go to our interactive review map briefly. Linked right here on the Draft Maps website is our interactive review map. This map allows you to zoom in and out to search for addresses and turn layers on and off, which is really, I think, the central piece of this. So if we want to keep map 127-26 on, but we also want to add map 130, let's add map 133. We can look at how these two maps are similar in some areas and different in others. For example, both keep West Park and Woodbridge together in the similar district in that part of the city. On the other hand, they very much differ when it comes to where they align the Walnut area. And by turning on and off the different layers, you can see how similar or different these maps are to each other. And if we scroll down on that list, you can see we have all of our maps on this list, not just the ones that are currently under consideration. We also have all of our demographics below that. We have our population units. This is the map we've been adding to as we've gotten requests from the community. For example, Councilwoman Kim asked for income above 200,000, which we were able to put as a layer onto this map to take a look at that, and how it overlays with some of our maps. So this is a very important tool. If we go to that search bar, kind of within there, you can put an address in there, search for an address, and it'll take you right to it. So you can compare it across different versions of the map. If you don't like our street, let's zoom in a little bit so we can see that when you zoom in, you can see that we have more. Let's zoom in like really, let's see. So we can see streets now. We can see properties here. Okay, you can zoom out a touch, I think. But you can see how you zoom in further, you can really see that street level detail, even building, as you zoom in far enough. And this really offers a lot of flexibility in terms of doing this. Trying to show this on paper maps is not really practical, but this allows us to do that. So our interactive review map is where we'll probably guide you if you ask for questions about, hey, is this property in District 4 or not? In this map, we'll put that address in and we can find out. Now let's go back over to the website a little bit. We still have on our next tab, the Draw Maps tab, all of our tools are available. So if you think, one of the things I should say that we're going to be working on is a Dave's redistricting template for each of our 6 focus maps. That should be coming this week as well. Sorry, a lot of these were requests we got last Tuesday, but it's been a little bit of a crazy week since then. We're going to be getting, we're still working on fulfilling all of the council's requests that come out of that meeting. We're going to have all of our templates for our 6 focus maps here on the Dave's Redistricting app website that will allow us to start with any of the 6 maps and see if you can make it better, do a better job of representing your community. Now, what I'll say also, last thing I'll say about that is we will be accepting additional draft maps, revised maps, suggestions on changes to maps, all the way up till the end of August. I believe August 30th is our last day. We're going to be taking maps for the September hearing. That gives us the time we need to draw them in, especially if we get 43 maps again, and make sure that they get posted a minimum of a week before the council hearing. And again, we have to make sure that we have to get them posted by September 5th. That means that August 31st is the last day we can take those maps to make sure we have time to process them. Gives us plenty of time, gives us some 4 community forums to think about and to study the maps in detail. But especially if we get 43, we want to make sure we have the time to do the great job and make sure we get all of your maps and your feedback properly in front of the council. And so let's think about feedback now. If we could flip back to the presentation for, I think, to wrap it up here, if we go to the next slide. The one thing I'll say as we go into our Q&A is we understand that you may like or dislike a particular map. Maybe it's not because of the map as a whole. Maybe it's because of a specific reason or specific area or part of the map. We really do welcome feedback. In fact, we encourage feedback on specific neighborhoods, specific communities, specific lines. It really helps me and it really helps the team if we know why you like or dislike a particular map. Because it often is the case that the best map out there isn't one single map from a submission, but it incorporates features of 4 or 5, maybe even a few different maps. So the more detailed and specific you are about what you like or dislike, the easier it is for me and for the team to be able to help work to put together, or maybe even your fellow community members, to work to put together the best map possible for the city. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Allison.
Thanks, Justin. And before we get into, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we'll be passing it back over to you all and ask you to either raise your hands or provide your feedback into the chat. But first and foremost, we do want to answer any questions that you may have right off the bat based off of any of the information that Justin said. And so I will give you all a moment to either type your question into the chat or feel free to raise your hand and someone will unmute you. And while we wait for any questions that may come in, Justin, we do have some questions that we have been getting already. One of which is, since there is a second deadline to submit maps, but there are focus maps already selected by council, will council still be considering my map at the next hearing?
Yeah, and that's a really common question. And I would preface that by saying, I don't think any of the 6 focus maps are going to be adopted by the council in their current form. I think we're likely to see that, and we have actually already seen the council request one revision. We are likely to see both the community and the council work together now to come up with improved versions of the focus maps. There are several maps that are similar to each other in different ways. And resolving some of those questions is a huge part of this next stage of the process. For example, several of the maps have 2 very heavily Asian majority districts, and they do so by dividing the northern part of the city into 2 separate districts. Other maps have 3 and do so by dividing the northern part of the city into 3 districts. Well, which one makes the most sense for the city? Is it important to keep all of the Tustin school district portion of the city on the western end of the district together in one district? Or is it better to keep all of, for example, Orchard Hills together in a single district? And that's the kind of question that we can really look at by putting 2 focus maps next to each other.
Awesome. Thanks for that explanation there, Justin. And at this point, we are starting to get feedback on some of the maps and focus maps. So if there are any additional questions that you may think of, whether that be regarding the focus maps, whether that's on the mapping tools, because you still want to submit your own map, we'll pop up a slide that has the districting email and phone number that we're taking answers and comments and questions at this time. So with that, unless there's any other last minute question, we'll switch our slides here to prompt any additional feedback that may come with the focus map. So the 2 questions that we do want to highlight here are the last 2 questions. And that those 2 questions are, what do you like about the draft maps? What part of each map work? What parts of the maps don't work? And so as we begin to get that feedback, I will note it would be great if you could provide the specific map that you're talking about in your comment before you actually provide your feedback. So that way we can know exactly which map you're talking about and track along with you. And then with that being said, we already have some commentary in our chat box here. So the first one says, hello, I would like a map that keeps Woodbridge the same. It is a big village, but most of the residents in this village all shop at the same places, share common lakes, and are affected by the same HOA. So the first map or the first comment would be to essentially keep the maps, and Justin, you may know the numbers of the maps off the top of your head that keep Woodbridge in the same, but this resident is asking for those maps to be considered.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of comment that, is really valuable, because we can take that to council and say, we have requests to keep Woodbridge together. So those 2 maps that divide Woodbridge do not meet that requirement as they stand. And if there are other things that other people like about those maps, we still know that it doesn't work in the Woodbridge area. And that can be something that either a resident, if you want to play around with the tool, can look at how you might keep Woodbridge together and keep the general feel of that map, or simply say that that's a map that doesn't work for other reasons either and should just be eliminated altogether. And especially what we'd love to hear is, okay, so there are a few different maps. I think 3 of our 6 maps or 4 of our 6 maps keep Woodbridge together. Where does it make sense to join it with? What communities have a similar issue? Woodbridge is about 40,000 residents. These districts are about 53,000. So where do we pick up that last 10,000 or so? You don't have to do that. I mean, obviously, if we just want to say Woodbridge, that's all I care about. That's my community of interest. We've recorded that, and this will be provided to the council.
Yes. And then we did receive one question on map 119. It says map 119 is 3 districts with requirement for 3 members elected at large within each district. It was suggested to consider this issue. It seems to have been discarded without comment. Is that finished?
Yeah, and I think it's 2 members within each of those districts. But I'll say that at this point in time, that's not what the council is considering. The council is considering a 6-district map. I can't think of a California city off the top of my head that has those kind of multi-member districts. And I know that like state law discourages them in a variety of ways. For example, they don't comply with the Fair Maps Act, or they don't comply with the California Voting Rights Act. Or other state laws governing certain aspects of voting rights in California. And so at this point, the council is opting to look at a 6-district map. If the council wanted to consider, 3 2-member districts, then I would say that, that could be a separate ballot measure, that could be a separate issue. It's just simply not what the council is considering at this time. And Oregon law maybe, or I'm assuming it's Portland, Oregon. We got a new comment in the chat. Portland is considering such at-large districts within multiple districts, I think. And it's true, there are cities in the country that do multi-member districts like this. But California law in particular tends not to favor that kind of arrangement. Whereas other states have different legal frameworks for local governments. I agree with you that it might be worth considering, but it's not what the council is considering as part of this process. But we'll still make sure that your comments do get in front of the council and they can see your thoughts on that as well. Anything that's submitted either in writing or if you raise your hand today and want to speak, or if you come to our council meeting or submit to our districting at cityofirvine.org, will be provided to the council as part of the packet feedback they get. We will make sure that comment gets in front of the council.
Definitely. And then with that, I will turn it back to the crowd here. Are there any additional comments to any of the draft maps that you may want to note here? It doesn't even necessarily have to get into the nitty-gritty of anything. It could just say, I would still, with any map that is chosen, I would still like this one village, this one neighborhood, this one area to stick together. And then as a reminder, I know we went through the maps in the presentation, but the maps are located at this link listed here, drawirvine.org/draft-maps. And so if you did want to look at the maps as we're going through this exercise right now, feel free to pull those up. I will note that at the in-person workshops, there will be giant blow up printouts of every single one of the focus maps. So that way you'd be able to get up throughout the presentation and take a look at those maps as well. And then we did get one additional question, and it said, don't 133 and 139 do the job of map 109 and map 146 that are pending? Justin, are you able to speak to that a little more?
I am just pulling them all up, so I have them in front of me to look at.
See,
And
this be a good note to know that not even the demographers knows all of the maps by heart. So feel free to pull up those maps right now if you feel like you want to provide any feedback on the focus maps.
yeah. So just looking at them briefly and the request that was made by council, at least when we come to, let me take a 130. 133 is one of our focus maps. So it is one of the maps that the council is still considering. I know that what we were asked to do was draw the northern two districts, 1 and 2, into one of the other maps, something similar to 144, is what the request was. Now, I know, for example, 139 crosses Interstate 5 to get part of the Spectrum neighborhoods. And that's not, and also it crosses Culver to include part of Turtle Ridge in a different area. Those are two things that I know the council wants to avoid on 139, or similar to 139. And 133, if the council wants 133, they still have it as part of their maps that their focus map pool. And it has a slightly different alignment in the north between 1 and 2 compared to 109. 133 has kind of jogs through the Woodbury Stonebridge neighborhoods. And that's one of the things that we're doing with 109 is kind of putting the Woodbury part into one area and Stonebridge together in a different area. Obviously there are a lot of different ways of configuring it. If you believe that 133 or 139 does the better job, then whatever we come up with 146, then please feel free to make that comment, submit that comment, and we'll make sure that it gets in front of the council.
And if any of those maps that you just stated, you like any portion of those maps, like we'll take that feedback as well. Whether you want to either provide that feedback today or take a closer look at those maps and just shoot us an email or a voicemail, we'll take your feedback that way as well. But with that being said, I'll give everyone here a second more.
So we got a question here that I keep saying what the council wants, but I also say it's all open for discussion. Must we describe a preferred map that accepts the council opinion made last week? And the answer is very clearly, like, you can submit whatever you would like and make your feedback and comments known. My job as part of producing map 146 is to be responsive to what the council has requested me to provide. And so we're going to, and that's what we're doing with that map. It doesn't mean it's the best map. It doesn't mean it's a map that the council will actually adopt. Obviously we're going to get additional maps. We're going to get additional feedback between now and then that might change their minds. They might have said something in the meeting on Tuesday last week that changes between now and September 12th. And so we really want to invite everyone to participate because, for example, the council has some requests to try to keep villages and communities together in that part of the city. But if that's not the best solution for that part of the city, and it's clear from residents that it's not, then I can't say that they're going to do that. So to answer your question, I have to be responsive in our draft and whatever we do as a result of that hearing. the map requested will reflect what the council asked us to provide, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be adopted.
Thanks, Justin. So we've answered a lot of questions here today. But again, if no feedback comes to mind tonight, we do have plenty of other avenues in order to get your feedback put into the record here. And with that, unless there's any like last minute comments or chats, then we can switch back over to the presentation and we can wrap this up for tonight.
We do have one additional comment in the chat and the Q&A.
Okay, there we go.
To add 139 to our focus maps.
Perfect. So we'll add 139 to our focus maps list. Thank you for that. And then we also have a comment here asking if the mobile home parks are split up or if they are together in any of the maps. Justin, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
It's good. It's a very good question, and I'm not entirely sure where all the mobile home parks are. If you have, if you want to provide the names of the mobile home communities that you're specifically asking about, we can look at that. We could also work with addresses and.
Justin, the two largest are the Meadows and the Groves. And one of them is located off of Jeffrey, just south of Walnut. So south between the 405 and the 5 in that region, but just south of the 5. And then the other one, I'm not going to get as exact across streets here, but I think you're looking closer to Jeffrey and like Roosevelt area, Jeffrey and Irvine Boulevard. It's up there north of the 5. So you have one north of the 5 and one south of the 5.
Okay.
It's definitely something we can look into, and it's also something that you can look on our drawirvine.org on the interactive web viewer. If you search for those communities, those locations, then you can turn the layers on and off to see where they are. You can definitely take a look into that as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that's great feedback on just to keep those mobile home parks together. And then we can look into that further on the maps just to see which maps are kept together, and feel free to look into that as well. And then with that here, we'll transfer back over to our presentation and wrap us up for today. And then with that here, we have, like Justin said at the beginning of the presentation, a few more workshops on the docket. One of which is tonight. This was our final virtual workshop of the districting process, but then we have a slew of in-person workshops. And as I mentioned, those workshops will be a little bit different as they will have the printouts of the maps readily available. So that way you can be able to stand up, walk around the room, take a quick look at all of those maps and be able to point to Justin and point to the rest of the team exactly the sections that you have questions on. So those workshops will be pretty interactive in the sense that you'd be able to point exactly about the section of the map that you're talking about. And so we have workshops until the end of September here. The process does go until October. So like Justin said, there are additional hearings throughout and sprinkled in between all of these upcoming workshops. But the entire schedule is listed on the website that we just showed. And in addition to the website, as I mentioned before, there are several other ways that you can provide your thoughts, your feedback. If you wanted to take a quicker look at the maps today and you're thinking to yourself, I know I have feedback, I just don't know what that is yet because the maps are relatively new. Feel free to look on drawirvine.org. You can zoom in, zoom out on all of those maps. And then once you're ready to provide your feedback, you can either give us a call, leave a voicemail, and someone will get back to you, or you can drop us an email at districting@cityofirvine.org, and we will get back to you there. Either way, your comments will be put into the record. So don't think just because it's a call, your comments will not get to council. So don't fret, your comments will be presented in front of council at the next 2 hearings. And then with that, that ends us for today. Thank you all so much for hopping on. I'll leave this up on the screen here, but we appreciate everything that you had to say tonight, and feel free to continue providing feedback. I hope you all have a great night. Thank you.